Hello, my name's David Worthington. Today I'm going to demonstrate how to simulate unique NAV users in a load test. This video is the fourth video in the series of videos about load testing Microsoft Dynamics NAV. In this video we will develop a load test that will create 100 unique NAV users and see what happens when they run on the server. To follow the steps in this demo you need some prerequisites. Firstly, Visual Studio 2013 Ultimate. Secondly, you'll need a Microsoft Dynamics NAV 2015 demonstration installation with the web client installed, and you need to configure to be using NAV user password authentication. For this demo, I'm using the NAV demo image deployed to a Microsoft Azure virtual machine, which is the easy way of setting up such a server. You'll need a NAV license that allows multiple concurrent users, and for this demo I'm actually using 100 concurrent users. You'll have to configure to as many users as your license allows. And then you have to have followed all the steps in the video. You have also followed all the steps in the video, how do I run NAV load test scenarios using Visual Studio. We will achieve this by the following steps. Firstly, we will create the NAV test users on the server. Secondly, we will configure the load test to connect using the NAV user password authentication for each individual user. And finally, we will monitor the NAV server while running the load test. Let's get started. So for the first step, we want to set up the 100 NAV test users. And I'm going to do that the easy way using a PowerShell script. So I'm going to switch to my virtual machine, and you see on the virtual machine I've currently only got the 2 users I've set up here. So I'm going to go to the PowerShell ISE, and this create users script, PowerShell script, which is actually available in our solution on GitHub, allows you to create very easily 100 users, much faster than typing them all in manually. It creates the first user just called user, then subsequent 100 users with the prefix of the ID. So let's just run that script now, and we have to enter the password, which I've saved before, and that will be the password for all the 100 users. And while that script's running, we can now check in NAV, look at the user list and refresh it, and see now we have all those users starting from 0 up to 99. So now that we've created those 100 users, the next step will be to configure the load test to use them. So the first step is to configure the project settings with the information about our server, including the username and password that we're going to be using, and then we will modify the order processor scenarios to use the NAV user password authentication. So let's just have a look at that. So if we look at the settings file here for our project, I'm using the NAV username user here, which will be prefixed, suffixed with the ID of the user, and the password which I've provided, and the URL to the web client on the server. So just to check that that URL is correct, I'm just going to log in here now. So the next step will be to have a look at the code that we need to modify, which is in the order process scenarios. And you can see here we just modify this function create user context manager. It's actually commented so you can see how to use Windows or NAV user password authentication. So I've commented out the Windows and just using the NAV user password authentication, providing those 2 values. So just to explain how this is going to work, we need to create a NAV user for every load test virtual user. So we have unique users being represented by each virtual user. And the way we do that is we know that Visual Studio is going to give each virtual user an ID starting with 0, and at runtime we can get that ID. So if we now look into the code for our user context manager, you can see here that whenever we're being asked to create a new user context, this is where we create the session for the user. I'm calling this function getUsername, and that's asking the load test to get the load test user context. So that's asking it to find out what the ID of the current user is. You can see the user ID, and we're just adding that to the existing username, and that's what we'll create the session for. And we're using the same password for each user because they're only test users and we're going to delete them afterwards. And the context manager is making sure that every user has an individual session throughout the run. So finally we're going to run the load test, but when we're going to run a load test on a remote server like this, we want to be able to monitor the server and to see what's happening. I've set up performance counters on the server. So if we switch to the virtual machine again, and if we look in performance monitors, I've just added some of the standard NAV performance monitors here so that when we start the load test we can see the performance. So I'm just going to clear that to start, and now we'll go to our load test and I'll configure the load test pattern. So the load test pattern will be, we're starting with 1 user, moving up to 100, and we're adding 5 users every second. That should create a fairly significant load on the server, and we'll be able to see that in the performance monitor. So let's start our test running now, and once the test is running we will switch over to the virtual machine to see the performance increasing. So if we select active sessions here and we'll highlight that in black, we can see that it's already increasing now. And at the same time we can see that the load on the server is increasing. We can see server operations per second is increasing as the number of users increase. And we can see that there's quite a lot of operations happening there. So it's now up to 25 users, and we can see also the processor time is keeping the server quite busy. We can see now we have all our 100 users connected to the server. So that concludes the demonstration for today. Just to recap, we created our 100 NAV test users using a PowerShell script which is available. We configured the load test to connect using the test users. And finally we monitored the NAV server using the performance counters while the load test was running. Here's some resources that are available to support you here. Firstly, how to configure the user authentication for the Microsoft Dynamics NAV web client. If you want to use NAV user password authentication, you have to understand how to do that. Also, the topic on monitoring Microsoft Dynamics NAV server also explains how you can use collector sets if you want to collect data over a longer period of time. And finally, on the NAV Get Ready page, you'll find this and other videos in the How Do I series. This video was created in collaboration with the Training Center Platan and Microsoft. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have learnt something today.